I hadn't even made it back from my father's funeral when my husband and his mother were already trying to break into his apartment. "Kick the door in, son. Half of this belongs to you by law now," my mother-in-law barked. But when the door finally opened, there stood a man whose very presence made them both stumble back. My husband wheezed, "Mama, it's him." Keisha loved her father's apartment. It wasn't just a home, it was a whole world filled with the scent of old books, strong black tea, and the faint, spicy aroma of his signature sandalwood cologne. The spacious two-bedroom pre-war brownstone with high ceilings in the heart of Chicago was her sanctuary, her place of power. Here, in the cozy armchair by the window, she could sit for hours with her father, Major Marcus Vance, and talk about everything under the sun. Well, mostly, she did the talking. He, a retired Army officer, a stern man of few words, would listen, occasionally asking a question or nodding his gray head. At 32 years old, Keisha still felt like the little girl he had taught to ride a bike in this very courtyard, the girl for whom he was and remained the most important man in her life. Her husband, Darnell, was different, simple, grounded, reliable, or so she had thought in the beginning. They had been married for 5 years, living in a small one-bedroom condo they had mortgaged, and their life flowed smoothly and predictably. Darnell worked as a mechanic. Keisha was a librarian. They weren't rich, but they had enough to get by. The main problem in their family wasn't even the lack of money, but Darnell's mother, Mrs. Louise Booker. A loud, domineering woman with an unshakable belief in her own righteousness, she had made it clear from the start that Keisha wasn't good enough for her golden boy. "Uppity," she would hiss through her teeth the first time she stepped into Keisha's apartment. "Reads her books all day but can't even season a pot of greens correctly. My Darnell is used to better." Keisha tried to ignore it. She tried to please her, baking sweet potato pies just the way her mother-in-law liked, patiently listening to her endless lectures. She wanted peace in the family, but the harder she tried, the bolder Louise became. Recently, when Major Vance's health had taken a sharp turn for the worse and the old soldier's heart began to fail, the mother-in-law's visits became more frequent. But she didn't come to visit Keisha and Darnell. She came to the Major's apartment, where Keisha had moved temporarily to care for him. Louise showed up under the pretext of helping, but her help consisted of walking around the spacious rooms with the air of a landlady, clicking her tongue. "Yes," she drawled during one such visit, running a finger along the carved back of an antique oak buffet. They knew how to build things back then, not like that cheap plywood they use now. And this location, right in the center, apartments like this are worth their weight in gold these days. Major Vance, sitting in his armchair wrapped in a blanket, just sighed heavily and turned toward the window. He couldn't stand Louise, calling her a market hustler behind her back. "This beauty shouldn't go to waste," the mother-in-law continued, not noticing or choosing to ignore the owner's reaction. "God willing, when Marcus gets better, we'll have to think about how to fit everyone in here. It's too tight for you and Darnell in that little box of yours, but here, there's space. You could play football in here." Keisha felt a chill run down her spine. "Mrs. Booker, this is Daddy's apartment." "So what?" She turned and looked at Keisha with a sugary, fake smile. "Your daddy is yours, but you are my son's wife. That means the apartment is practically ours, family property." Darnell, who had come along with his mother, coughed awkwardly. "Mama, why are you starting?" "What am I starting? I'm thinking about the future, about the grandkids. Where are they going to grow up? In your one-room cage? Here, there's space, fresh air." She said it with such confidence, as if the matter had already been decided. Keisha had written it off as her mother-in-law's lack of tact, her insatiable desire to control everything. She couldn't imagine that it wasn't just idle chatter. It was artillery preparation before the coming offensive. That evening, when they were left alone, her father breathed heavily and said, "Baby girl, you be careful with them. My heart tells me they aren't circling around here for anything good." "Daddy, come on." She adjusted his pillow. "Mrs. Booker is just loud." Sparrows on a branch are loud. That woman is a vulture, he cut in. Greedy eyes, grabbing hands. I dealt with people like that back in my day. I know the type. Don't trust that Darnell of yours too much either. He's putty in her hands. It hurt Keisha to hear such words about her husband. She loved Darnell. Yes, he was soft. Yes, he listened to his mother in everything. But he was kind, or so she thought. He wasn't capable of betrayal. How wrong she was. That conversation with her father was their last. That night he got worse. The ambulance, the ICU, 2 days of fighting for his life. And that was it. The old soldier's heart stopped. Keisha's world collapsed. She walked around like she was in a dream, organizing the funeral. Darnell and Louise were nearby, showing loud, performative concern. The mother-in-law wrung her hands, wailing about what a great man they had lost. "Gold, not a father-in-law!" she cried. Darnell hugged Keisha by the shoulders, whispering words of comfort, and she, stunned by grief, was even grateful to them. She didn't notice the quick, businesslike glances they exchanged behind her back. She didn't hear Louise, turning away to blow her nose, quietly hiss to her son, "Main thing is, find the documents, take the keys and everything." She was too immersed in her pain to see the truth, a truth that was so close, so obvious, but which her grief-fogged mind refused to accept. The alarm bell that had rung while her father was alive was now growing into a deafening siren, but she couldn't hear it yet. The days after the funeral blurred into one continuous gray fog for Keisha. She mechanically accepted condolences from relatives and neighbors, answered phone calls, and sorted through Major Vance's belongings. Every item, his old dress uniform with the medals, his worn notebook, his favorite coffee mug, struck her heart with sharp pain. She sat for hours in his armchair, wrapped in his scratchy wool blanket, trying to comprehend that he was gone. Darnell and Louise developed a frantic energy during this time. They took on all the chores, and initially, Keisha was immensely grateful. She felt she couldn't have managed alone. They answered calls, bought groceries for the repast, and dealt with the funeral home. "Don't you worry, baby, you just rest," Louise would say, patting Keisha's hand. "Darnell and I will handle everything. You need to think about yourself, your health. Such a tragedy." But very soon, Keisha began to notice oddities. Her husband and mother-in-law's care was strangely selective. They were far more interested in the papers and documents left behind by her father than in the organizational details. "Keisha, honey, where did Marcus keep the deed to the apartment?" Louise asked casually one afternoon while they were sorting through the desk drawers. "We ought to get them in order for the notary." "I don't know," Keisha answered, lost. "Probably in the safe." "The safe?" Her mother-in-law perked up instantly. "Where is it? And where are the keys?" "The safe is in the closet. Daddy always carried the keys with him. They must be in his personal effects the hospital gave us." The next day, Darnell went to the hospital and picked up the bag with her father's things. That evening, while Keisha was in the bathroom, she heard a lock click in the bedroom. She walked out and saw Darnell and his mother hunched over the open safe. "What are you doing?" she asked, stopping in the doorway. They flinched and spun around. A flash of annoyance crossed Louise's face, but she immediately plastered on a sympathetic smile. "There you are, sweetie. We just decided to check if everything was in place, tidy things up, you never know." Darnell silently pulled a thick folder of documents from the safe and placed it on the table. "Yeah, here they are. Everything's here. The deed, the floor plan, the records," he mumbled, shuffling through the papers. "Well, thank the Lord," Louise concluded. "Now I'm calm. Let them stay with us for safekeeping for now. In your grief, you might lose them." She shamelessly grabbed the folder and shoved it into her oversized purse. Keisha wanted to object, to say that these were her father's documents and they should stay with her. But she was so emotionally exhausted that she simply didn't have the strength to argue. She just nodded silently. Suspicions, which had previously been just a vague feeling, began to take shape. Their interest in the documents was unhealthy, feverish. They weren't behaving like grieving relatives, but like looters who had stumbled upon treasure. Discrepancies appeared one after another. Darnell, who had never been interested in legal matters, suddenly began discussing inheritance laws. "You know," he said one evening, "by law, the first-tier heirs are children, parents, and spouses. That means you. But since you're my wife, everything you inherit automatically becomes our community property." "That's not true," Keisha corrected him automatically. She had looked into this once as a librarian. "Inheritance is separate property. It belongs only to the person who receives it." "Really?" Darnell raised his eyebrows in surprise. "I read somewhere it was different." "Well, it doesn't matter. We're a family anyway. Everything is shared." He said it lightly, but Keisha caught a note of disappointment in his voice. He had clearly been counting on a different answer. Louise also constantly brought up the topic, but from a different angle. "Oh, Keisha, how are you going to manage such a big apartment all by yourself now?" She sighed. "The utilities must be huge, and the property taxes. That's a fortune to pay." "I'll manage," Keisha replied. "Will you?" The mother-in-law shook her head. "It's hard alone. Now, if you and Darnell moved in here, sold your little place, then yes, it would be easier together, and I would feel calmer knowing you were looked after." She constantly, methodically, drop by drop, instilled the idea that Keisha couldn't handle it alone, that the apartment was a burden, not a blessing. Keisha remembered her father's words more frequently now. "They aren't circling for anything good." She started watching them. She saw Darnell, talking to his mother on the phone, walk into another room, speaking quietly, almost in a whisper. She saw the meaningful glances they exchanged behind her back. Her anxiety was turning into concrete suspicion. They were hiding something from her, and that something was connected to her father's apartment. One day, while cleaning the living room, she found a crumpled piece of paper under the sofa where Darnell usually sat. It was a flyer for one of those predatory "we buy houses for cash" companies. A phrase was circled in thick marker. "Closing in 3 days, cash up front, help with complicated titles." Keisha's hands went cold. Why did Darnell have this flyer? What complicated titles? She smoothed out the paper and shoved it into her pocket. This was another piece of the puzzle, forming a very ugly picture. She decided to talk to Darnell directly. That evening, when he came home from the shop, she showed him the flyer. "What is this?" He glanced at it, and for a second, fear flashed across his face, but he quickly pulled himself together. "Oh, that. Someone stuffed it in the mailbox. I didn't even look at it, just pulled it out and tossed it. Why?" "Are you sure?" She looked him straight in the eyes. "I'm sure." He looked away. "Keisha, what is this interrogation? My father-in-law just died and you're coming at me with some trash? Have you no conscience?" He turned and walked into the kitchen, leaving her alone in the room. In that moment, she realized he wasn't just lying. He was attacking. He was using her grief and vulnerability to make her feel guilty. It was his mother's favorite tactic. She no longer had any doubts. They were planning something dirty and low. And she had to find out exactly what before it was too late. She felt like a character in a detective novel tracking down dangerous criminals. Except the criminals were the people closest to her, and that was the most terrifying part. The realization that her husband and mother-in-law were playing a double game became the point of no return for Keisha. The grief from losing her father hadn't gone anywhere, but now it was mixed with a new, unfamiliar feeling, a cold, ringing rage. They dared to use her vulnerability, her pain, to pull off their dirty schemes. They thought she was weak, crushed, incapable of resistance, and that was their main mistake. Keisha didn't cry at night anymore. She thought. Her brain, accustomed to the systematic organization and analysis she used in the library, was now working in investigator mode. She correlated facts, analyzed words, and looked for inconsistencies. She remembered that when Darnell took the documents from her father's safe, he said he would put them in a safe place. But where was that place? She decided to conduct a search, not total, but targeted. She knew Darnell was a creature of habit. He kept all things important to him in one place, an old military footlocker he kept on the top shelf of their bedroom closet. He called it his stash. Waiting until he left for work, she got the stepladder and pulled down the heavy, dusty box. It was locked with a small padlock. She didn't have the key, but nearby on the shelf was a toolbox. A thin metal wire, a few minutes of patience, and the lock clicked open. Her father had taught her this too, joking about it in her childhood. "A soldier needs to know how to open any lock," he used to say. Her heart pounded as she lifted the lid. Inside, under a stack of old car magazines and fishing gear, she found what she was looking for. The folder with her father's apartment documents. But next to it lay another one, made of blue cardstock. She opened it. Inside were forms, blank but stamped. A quitclaim deed, a power of attorney giving Darnell full rights to act on her behalf, and a spousal consent form. At the bottom of all the forms were the stamps and signatures of a notary, a Mr. Higgins, but the lines for her own signature were empty. Keisha gasped. They were preparing. They didn't just want to persuade her, they intended to force her to sign these papers, or forge her signature. The presence of pre-stamped seals meant they had a notary in their pocket, ready to commit a crime. She took photos of every form, every stamp with her phone, then carefully put everything back, locked the box with the same flimsy lock, and put it back in place. Now she had her first real evidence, not just suspicion, but proof of preparation for fraud. But that wasn't enough. She needed to understand their full plan. She knew Darnell had recently bought a second cheap burner phone. He claimed it was for work, so he wouldn't drain his main smartphone's battery. She found it in the pocket of his work jacket. There was no passcode. She opened the messages, and what she read made her shudder. It was a text thread with Louise, short, businesslike, like a report from the front lines. "Mama, did you get the forms?" Darnell, "Yeah, got everything." Mama, "Watch out. Don't spill the beans to her. She needs to think we're just helping. She'll sign everything without looking when the time comes." Darnell, "When is the time?" Mama, "Next week. She'll be a mess. I'll prep her. Tell her it's needed to process the inheritance. She'll sign whatever we need." Darnell, "What if she refuses?" Mama, "She won't. Where's she gonna go?" Alone, no daddy, no support. We're her only family. She'll do what she's told. She'll do what she's told. Keisha gripped the phone until her knuckles turned white. So that was their plan. Use her grief, her loneliness, to trick her into signing the papers to sell the apartment, and then, obviously, throw her out on the street. She took photos of this conversation, too. Now she had the full set. Motive, preparation, plan of action. The catalyst, the point after which she realized she couldn't wait any longer, was Mrs. Booker herself. She arrived the next day, as always, uninvited. Her face was mournful, but her eyes darted around, assessing the furniture. She sat in the kitchen and started the conversation from afar. "Oh, Keisha, you look so gaunt. Such grief. You need to clear your head. Get some rest." "Where would I go?" Keisha sighed, playing along. "You should go down south to your aunt's place in Georgia." The mother-in-law perked up instantly. "Or somewhere else. For a week or two, change the scenery, get some fresh country air. Darnell and I will look after the apartment here, start settling the inheritance matters slowly so we don't burden you." There it was. She was trying to ship her out of town to pull everything off in her absence. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Booker," Keisha said, looking her straight in the eye. "But I'm not going anywhere. I'll handle my father's affairs myself." A flash of poorly concealed irritation crossed her mother-in-law's face. "You silly girl," she hissed. "You don't understand anything about these matters. You'll only mess it up. A man should handle this. Darnell, he's the head." "And what am I, according to you?" Keisha asked quietly. "You're the neck," the mother-in-law smirked. "Where the husband turns, that's where you look. So don't be stubborn. Give Darnell power of attorney, and you go rest. It'll be better for everyone." She stood up and left without saying goodbye. Keisha remained sitting in the kitchen. Now she knew everything. Their plan was simple and cynical, and they were confident in their success. But they hadn't accounted for one thing. Sometimes the neck turns in a completely different direction than the head wants, especially if that neck has its own brain and a steel spine inherited from a colonel. She no longer felt like a victim. She felt like a soldier upon whom war had been declared, and she accepted the challenge. She knew that the family gathering scheduled for next week was their deadline, the day they planned to strike. That meant she had to strike first. She called her cousin Tasha, who lived in New York and worked as a high-end realtor. "Tasha, hey, I have something very important and very urgent." She briefly outlined the situation. "Damn," Tasha drawled. "Your husband's family is trash. Okay, listen to me. I need photos of all the documents you found and the address of that notary. I'll run him through my channels. And also," she paused, "is there anyone your father trusted more than anyone? An old friend, a fellow soldier?" "There is," Keisha remembered. "Sergeant Cyrus Webb, Uncle Cyrus. They served together. Daddy called him his conscience." "Perfect. Find his number. We're going to need him." Keisha felt threads appearing in her hands that she could pull. She wasn't alone anymore. She had allies, and she was ready for battle. A battle for her father's memory and her own future. Having received the first instructions from Tasha, Keisha felt much more confident. The chaos in her head began to give way to a clear plan of action. She was no longer crushed by grief and betrayal. She was mobilized. Her father had taught her, in any confusing situation, make a plan. And she was making one. First, she sent Tasha all the photos of the documents she found in Darnell's stash via a secure app. Tasha replied almost immediately, "Received. This notary is shady. I see it already. The seal looks fake. I'll dig deeper. Stay strong." The next step was finding Cyrus Webb. Keisha remembered him from childhood. A tall, stern black man with thick graying eyebrows and a quiet but very commanding voice. He rarely visited, but every visit was an event. He and her father could sit in the kitchen for hours, drinking whiskey and talking about the service, about the past. Keisha found his number in her father's old address book. She stared at the digits for a long time, hesitant to call. What would she say? "Hello, Uncle Cyrus. My husband and mother-in-law are trying to steal my apartment." It sounded wild, but she couldn't retreat. She dialed the number. Finally, a familiar, slightly gravelly bass voice answered. "Speaking." "Mr. Cyrus? Hello? This is Keisha, Marcus Vance's daughter." Silence hung on the line for a few seconds. "Keisha." His voice warmed. "Hello, child. I offer my condolences. I tried calling you, but I couldn't get through." "Thank you." Her voice trembled. I really need your help." "What happened?" He became serious instantly. Keisha, stumbling and anxious, told him everything. Darnell's behavior, the mother-in-law, the hidden documents, the overheard conversation. She spoke, and he listened silently. When she finished, he said only one word. "Scumbags." Then he paused and added, "I understand everything. Your father, he sensed something like this might happen. He called me a week before everything, asked me to look out for you if anything happened to him." "Really?" Keisha gasped. "Really? Said he didn't trust that husband of yours. Said his eyes were shifty and his mama had the eyes of a starving hyena. Pardon my bluntness." Keisha chuckled bitterly. "He was right." "All right, then." Cyrus's voice turned to steel, like in his old command days. "No panic. Where are you right now?" "In Daddy's apartment." "Stay there. Don't open the door to anyone. I'll be there in an hour, and we'll draft a defense plan." Exactly 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. Keisha checked the peephole. Cyrus stood there, looking just the same, trim, in a sharp, dark coat with a piercing gaze. He held a small briefcase. Keisha let him in. He entered, took off his coat, walked into the living room, and stopped in front of her father's portrait on the mantel. He stood silently for a moment, then sighed heavily. "Forgive me, Marcus. I wasn't there." Then he turned to Keisha. "All right, show me what you've got." She showed him the photos on her phone. He studied them intently, zooming in on every detail. "I see," he nodded. "Sloppy work, but bold. They're banking on your depression and lack of legal knowledge. This notary, Mr. Higgins, 100% fake. Guys like him were on every corner back in the day. I'll check him out. I bet his biography has plenty of interesting chapters." He sat at the table and opened his briefcase. Inside wasn't paper, but a laptop and some devices Keisha didn't recognize. "What is that?" "This, Keisha, is listening and recording equipment." He smirked. "Old military surplus, very reliable. We need to record their conversation, get direct proof of their conspiracy." "But how? They won't talk openly in front of me." "We'll make them think you aren't here." The plan was bold but simple. Cyrus installed several tiny, almost invisible microphones and cameras in the apartment. One in the hallway, another in the living room. Everything fed into his laptop. "Tomorrow morning," he instructed her, "you leave the house loudly so the neighbors hear. Tell Darnell on the phone that you're going to the cemetery, then to a friend's, and won't be back until late. But you come back in 30 minutes and quietly slip into the apartment. You have the second set of keys, right?" "I do." "Good. Come in and hide in your father's bedroom closet. I'll be sitting in my car down the block, listening and recording everything. I'm certain as soon as they know the apartment is empty, they'll rush over here to do reconnaissance, and that's when they'll slip up." Keisha felt like a character in a spy movie. She was terrified, but at the same time she felt a rush of adrenaline. The next day, she did everything exactly as Cyrus ordered. In the morning, she called Darnell. "Darnell, I'm going to be gone all day. I need to go to the cemetery, and then I just want to be alone. Don't worry about me." "Okay, Keisha, of course." His voice was full of fake sympathy. "Rest. You need it." She left the apartment, slamming the door loudly on purpose, went downstairs, walked around the block, and 30 minutes later returned just as quietly, opening the door with her key. She crept into her father's bedroom and froze behind the heavy curtains near the window. She didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, Darnell's car pulled into the courtyard. He got out, followed by Louise. They approached the entrance, looking around. Keisha's heart hammered. She heard the key turn in the lock. The door opened. "Is she here?" Louise's whisper cut through the silence. "No, I told you she left," Darnell replied. "We have a few hours." They walked into the living room. Keisha, holding her breath, watched them through the crack in the door. "All right," the mother-in-law commanded. "Let's make this quick. Where are the papers?" "I gave them to you!" "I mean the other ones. The will. He must have left a will. Where could it be?" "I don't know, Mama. I tore everything apart while she was at the hospital. There's nothing." They began frantically searching the apartment, opening drawers, cabinets, shaking out books. "There has to be one," Louise hissed. "An old soldier wouldn't leave things without papers. If he left everything to her, then our power of attorney is useless toilet paper." "He couldn't have left it all to her," Darnell argued. "By law, as the spouse, I have a claim too." "What claim, you idiot?" his mother snapped. "In inheritance, there's no community property. If he willed it to her, we get nothing." Keisha listened, and her blood ran cold. So that's what they were afraid of. A will. And indeed, there wasn't one. Her father hated talking about death and hadn't left any instructions. Surprisingly, this was working in her favor. They were acting blindly, panicking. "Fine," Louise said finally, calming down a bit. "If it's not here, it's not here. That means we go with Plan B. Tomorrow is the family gathering. She'll be a total mess. You slip her the papers to sign, she'll sign everything. Just make sure she doesn't read them." "What if she reads them?" "She won't," the mother said confidently. "I'll distract her, and you just point your finger where to sign, and that's it. The apartment is ours. Then we ship her off to the country to recover, sell this place quietly, and split the cash." Keisha clenched her fists so hard her nails dug into her palms. She recorded it all, every word. Now she had undeniable proof. She heard them leave. The front door slammed. She waited another 10 minutes, then emerged from her hiding place and called Cyrus. "I got it all," he said. "The audio is crystal clear. Now we have everything we need to bury them." She knew tomorrow would be a hard day, the memorial gathering, and the decisive battle. But now she was ready. Her secret investigation had borne fruit. She knew the enemy's plan, and she had one of her own. The day of the gathering was gray and damp, matching Keisha's mood. She had been on her feet since morning, cooking, setting the table, greeting relatives. Darnell and Louise were there too, playing the roles of the grief-stricken son-in-law and family matriarch. They bustled about, pouring liquor for the guests, speaking the right words about the deceased. Keisha looked at their hypocritical faces and felt rage boiling inside, but she held it together. Today she had to be strong. After the meal, when most of the guests had left and only the closest family remained, Mrs. Louise Booker began her move. "Keisha, baby," she said in her most sympathetic tone, sitting next to her on the sofa. "It's so hard for you right now, and there's still so much paperwork ahead, probate court, filing documents. You don't understand any of that." "I don't," Keisha agreed meekly, lowering her eyes. "See? But Darnell here is sharp. He'll figure it all out. You just sign a power of attorney for him, and he'll run around to all the offices himself. You just rest. Recover." As she spoke, Darnell, sitting across from them, pulled that same blue folder from his bag. "Yeah, Keisha," he said, sliding the papers toward her. "Mama's right. Don't stress yourself. Just a few signatures needed for the notary so I can act on your behalf." He opened the folder and laid out the sheets. The general power of attorney, the quitclaim deed with empty lines, the spousal consent. "Right here, here, and here." He pointed his finger at the spots. Keisha picked up a pen, her hand trembling. She looked at Darnell, then at his mother. They stared back, expectant, tense. They were so close to their goal. She slowly brought the pen to the paper, and at that moment, the doorbell rang. Darnell and Louise flinched. "Who is that?" the mother-in-law asked nervously. "We aren't expecting anyone." "I'll get it," Keisha said, putting down the pen. She stood up and walked to the hallway. Standing at the door was Cyrus Webb, and behind him stood two others, one in a police uniform, the other in a sharp suit with a briefcase. "Good evening," Cyrus said, stepping into the apartment. "Are we interrupting?" Darnell and Louise rushed into the hallway. Seeing the uninvited guests, they froze. Louise's face turned white as a sheet. Who are you?" she stammered. "I am a friend of Marcus Vance," Cyrus introduced himself. "And this is Detective Simmons. And this is Mr. Samuel Clark, a legitimate notary. We've come regarding a very important matter concerning the inheritance." He walked into the living room, ignoring the stunned hosts. The police officer and the notary followed. "What inheritance?" Louise found her voice. "There was no will. Everything is by law." "That's where you're mistaken, Mrs. Booker." Cyrus turned and looked at her with a cold, piercing gaze. "There was a will, and I am the executor." He nodded to the notary. Mr. Clark opened his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. "According to the last will and testament of the deceased Marcus Vance, I must read his will in the presence of all parties," he announced in an official tone. He opened the envelope and began to read. "I, Marcus Vance, being of sound mind and memory, leave all my property, personal and real, including the apartment at this address, to my only and beloved daughter, Keisha Vance." Louise let out a sound like a hissing tire. "But that is not all," the notary raised his hand. "There is a second clause. I also appoint my old friend and fellow soldier, Cyrus Webb, as the executor of my will. I entrust him to ensure that my daughter does not become a victim of fraudsters and greedy relatives, specifically her husband, Darnell Booker, and his mother, Louise Booker." At these words, Darnell collapsed onto a chair, stunned. Louise stood gripping the back of the armchair. In the event that the aforementioned persons attempt to acquire my property through deceit, I instruct Cyrus Webb to turn over all materials confirming their criminal intent to law enforcement. The notary finished. He lowered the paper. Dead silence hung in the room. "What materials?" Louise rasped. "These materials." Cyrus pulled the laptop from his bag, opened it, and turned the screen toward them. "Here, for example, is the audio recording of your conversation yesterday in this very apartment, where you discussed in detail how to force Keisha to sign fraudulent documents." He played the recording. Their own voices filled the room, hissing, greedy, cynical. "And here," he opened another file, "are photos of the forms with fake notary seals that you kept in your stash box. Darnell, and here are the texts with your mother where you discuss the details of the scam." With every new piece of evidence, Darnell and Louise's faces turned grayer. Cyrus turned to the police officer. "Detective, I believe you have ample grounds to conduct a thorough interview with these citizens." Detective Simmons nodded. "Absolutely. Mrs. Booker, Mr. Booker, I'm going to ask you to come with me to the station to answer some questions." "You have no right!" Louise shrieked. "We didn't do anything." "Didn't do it yet," the detective corrected. "But you were preparing to. And conspiracy to commit fraud involving real estate is a felony. So let's go. Don't make this worse." It was a total, crushing defeat. The shock of betrayal that Keisha had felt was now being experienced by them. They weren't just caught red-handed. They were humiliated, exposed before the law. Keisha stood and looked at them, at her now almost ex-husband, who sat with his head pulled into his shoulders, at her mother-in-law, who was shaking with impotent rage. She felt nothing, no joy, no vengeance, just a cold, heavy exhaustion. She realized the scale of their malice was far greater than she thought. They didn't just want money, they wanted to take everything from her home, her father's memory, her future. They were ready to commit a crime without a second thought. And if not for her father, his foresight, and his loyal old friend, they would have succeeded. The thought made her shudder. She had been so close to the edge. The exposure was complete and irreversible. Their dirty little plan had crumbled to dust, and now they had to answer for it to the full extent of the law. The scene in the apartment resembled the finale of a crime drama. Detective Simmons politely but firmly nudged a deathly pale Darnell toward the exit. Louise, realizing screaming wouldn't help, tried a new role, the sick, helpless old woman. She grabbed her chest, rolled her eyes, and moaned that she needed a doctor. "You'll get a doctor," the detective replied indifferently. "At the station, we have a medic." Cyrus and the notary watched silently, while Keisha just stood by the window looking out at the Chicago street. She didn't want to see their humiliated faces. She was disgusted. When they were finally let out and the door clicked shut behind them, Keisha slowly turned around. Cyrus walked up to her. "That's it, Keisha. Show's over." Is it really over?" she whispered. "It's over. Now the professionals will handle them. I don't think they'll get off with a slap on the wrist. Too much evidence. Forgery, conspiracy, intent to defraud." "And what do I do now?" "You live." He placed his heavy, warm hand on her shoulder. "Live and remember your father. He would be proud of you today. You didn't crumble. You didn't surrender. You fought." The notary, gathering his papers, cleared his throat politely. "I must be going, Ms. Vance. You'll need to come by my office in the next few days to formalize the inheritance paperwork." "Okay," she nodded. When she was left alone with Cyrus, he said, "Listen to me, child. Now they're going to try to pressure you through mutual friends, through lawyers. They'll beg, plead, threaten. Do not give in. Not an inch. These people deserve neither pity nor forgiveness." "I know," she said firmly. "Good." He nodded. "Now you need to rest. I'm leaving. If anything happens, call me day or night." He left. Keisha was alone in the empty, echoing apartment. She walked slowly through the rooms, touching her father's things. His books, his chess set, his old cap on the shelf. Everything was in its place. She had defended this world. She had protected it. But the peace didn't last long. The escalation Cyrus warned about began almost immediately. First, Darnell's lawyer called. He spoke in an oily, ingratiating voice. "Ms. Vance, I understand your state, but perhaps we can settle this misunderstanding amicably. Darnell is deeply remorseful. He was misled by his mother. He is ready to do anything to make amends." "Anything?" Keisha asked. "Absolutely. He is ready to waive any claims to the apartment. He just wants you to drop the charges." "Tell Darnell," Keisha replied, remembering Cyrus's instructions, "that the conversation is over. All further communication goes through the detective." She hung up. Then the calls from relatives started, the same ones who had eaten her food at the repast just yesterday. "Keisha, baby, it's Auntie Gail," a voice chirped. "I heard what happened with you and Darnell. You know, it's not right to put your own husband in jail. You gotta protect the family." "A family that tries to rob you doesn't need protecting, Auntie Gail," Keisha cut her off. "Oh, what are you saying?" the aunt gasped. "They just made a mistake. It happens to everyone." Keisha silently hung up. They launched a whole smear campaign against her. They spread rumors that she was the con artist, that she married a simple guy like Darnell just to kick him out after her rich daddy died, that she was in cahoots with some gangsters, that's what they called Cyrus, to frame an honest family. The lies were so absurd that at first, Keisha even chuckled, but then it stopped being funny. Some acquaintances, especially from Darnell's circle, started to believe it. She caught sideways, judgmental glances. Her social media was attacked by bots with insults and threats. She found herself in psychological isolation. The ground was slipping from under her feet. It felt like the whole world was against her. She sat alone in her big empty apartment and felt like a hunted animal. Darnell didn't stay quiet either. He wrote her long, tearful emails. "Keisha, I can't live without you. I made a mistake. I know, but I love you. Forgive me. Let's forget everything like a bad dream. I'll do whatever you say. Just drop the charges." He pressed on her sorest spots, memories, remaining feelings, pity. And one day, after a particularly heartbreaking letter, she almost broke. She sat crying, thinking, maybe I should forgive him. He was my husband. He was family once. She called Cyrus. "I can't take it anymore," she sobbed. "They've worn me down." "Stay calm." His voice sounded like an order. "What happened?" She told him about the letters, the rumors, her despair. He listened, then said, "Keisha, this is classic manipulation. They're trying to break you, make you feel guilty. Don't fall for it. Remember who they are. Remember what they wanted to do to you." "But he writes that he loves me." "He doesn't love you. He loves your apartment and your money," Cyrus snapped. "And right now, he loves his freedom, which he might lose. For that, he'll say anything." He paused, then added, "Do you want me to show you something that will clear your doubts once and for all?" "What?" "Come to my place tomorrow. I'll show you who your remorseful husband really is." The next day, Keisha went to see him. He lived in an old building downtown, a historic place just like her father's. His office, filled with books, smelled of tobacco and strong coffee. He silently handed her a folder. "Look." Keisha opened it. Inside were printouts, detailed phone records and bank statements for Darnell over the last few months. "Where did you get this?" she gasped. "I have my methods," Cyrus answered evasively. "Read." And she read. With every line, her hair stood on end. It turned out that while Darnell was writing her tearful letters about love and remorse, he was living an active parallel life. He was chatting on dating apps with other women. He was spending money, obviously borrowed from his mother or somewhere else, on restaurants and clubs. He was buying expensive gifts for some girl named Katie. But the worst thing was something else. In his bank statement, there was a line, "Transfer to private individual, amount $5,000. Date, the day after her father's funeral. "What is this?" she whispered. "That," said Cyrus, "is payment for the services of that crooked notary who made the fake forms for them. He wasn't sorry, Keisha. He kept working on his plan. Even after I caught them, he just switched tactics from aggressive to pitiful." Keisha closed the folder. Her doubts, her pity, her last hopes that there was anything human left in Darnell, all of it crumbled to dust. She felt as if she had been dipped in a vat of sludge. Her patience, her capacity for forgiveness, had run out. She realized she wasn't dealing with lost, stumbling people. She was dealing with predators who would stop at nothing. Pitying them meant signing her own death warrant. Returning from Cyrus's place, Keisha felt as if someone had taken off her rose-colored glasses and forced her to look at the world with a clear, unclouded gaze. There was no room left for doubt, pity, or hope for reconciliation. There was only a cold, ringing emptiness where feelings used to be, and a firm understanding. The war had to be finished. She stopped answering relatives' calls, blocked all unknown numbers, and deleted her social media pages. She walled herself off from their dirty world. The only people she talked to were Cyrus and Tasha, her realtor cousin. The court hearing was scheduled for a month later. All this time, under the guidance of her guardian angels, Keisha prepared for it as the main battle of her life. She was no longer a passive victim. She became an active participant, the brain center of the process. They decided not to limit themselves to fraud charges. Cyrus, using his old connections in law enforcement, dug deeper into Louise Booker's past, and what he found was stunning. It turned out that a story about theft at the post office years ago, which had been hushed up out of pity, was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind her trailed a whole string of petty but numerous scams: pension fraud, fake benefits, tax evasion. She had lived her whole life by the principle, grab a little here, cheat a little there. "She's not just a thief," Cyrus said, showing Keisha the dossier. "She's a pathological liar and manipulator. And your Darnell is her product, her creation. The apple didn't fall far from the tree." These new facts were to be their secret weapon in court. They didn't plan to reveal them right away. They waited for Louise to start playing the poor, slandered pensioner. And that day came. Keisha entered the courtroom with her head held high. She was calm. Across from her, at the defendant's table, sat Darnell and Louise. Darnell looked at the floor while his mother drilled holes into Keisha with a hateful stare. She was dressed all in black, with a mourning scarf on her head. The performance continued. Their lawyer, hired apparently with their last dimes, built the defense on the idea that this was a domestic dispute, that no one intended to defraud anyone, and that Keisha, in a state of nervous breakdown after her father's death, misunderstood everything and made a mountain out of a molehill. When Louise was allowed to speak, she stood up and, dabbing a handkerchief to her dry eyes, began her aria. "Your Honor." Her voice trembled with fake suffering. "I have lived an honest life. I raised my son alone, denied myself everything. I just wanted to help this girl, my daughter-in-law. She was left all alone, poor orphan, and she repaid me with black ingratitude, accused me, her husband's own mother, of theft. How could she even say such things?" She spoke long, beautifully, pathetically. Some in the room even began to sympathize with her. Keisha sat with a stone face. When the mother-in-law finished her speech, Cyrus, who was testifying for Keisha, asked to speak. "Your Honor, I would like to ask Mrs. Booker a few questions." The judge allowed it. Cyrus stood up and approached her. "Mrs. Booker," he began quietly, but his voice carried through the hall. "You say you have lived an honest life?" "Yes," she replied firmly. "Do you remember 1998? The post office branch, number 12, where you were the manager?" Louise went pale. I don't remember." "Allow me to remind you," Cyrus continued. "A shortage of $5,000. Huge money back then. Money you appropriated by forging timesheets. No charges were filed then. As your supervisor, I pitied you. a single mother, and covered the shortage from my own funds. Do you remember that?" Silence fell over the room. Louise was silent, staring at him with eyes wide in horror. That is slander." "Slander?" Cyrus pulled an old yellowed piece of paper from a folder. "And what is this? Your handwritten promissory note to repay the debt, with your signature. Would you like to run a handwriting analysis?" It was a knockout. Louise went limp and collapsed onto the bench. Her mask of an honest worker was ripped off. "Your Honor," Cyrus finished, "I simply wanted to show that the propensity for fraud in this citizen is not her daughter-in-law's invention, but a lifestyle." The judge, a stern middle-aged man, looked at Louise for a long time, then shifted his gaze to Keisha. The rest was a formality. They presented the audio recording, the fake forms, the testimony of the notary, who was also charged. Darnell's lawyer tried to say something about pressure from his mother, but no one cared anymore. The climax was when Keisha, giving testimony, spoke not about documents or money, but about something else. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "When I came back from my father's funeral, these people, my husband and his mother, were already standing at his apartment door with a locksmith. They were going to break the door down. They were in such a hurry. They were in such a hurry to divide what didn't belong to them that they didn't even let me mourn my father." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I don't need their money. I don't need them in prison. I just want them to leave me alone, to disappear from my life forever." The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Keisha sat down. She had done everything she could. She told the truth. Now the decision lay with the court. She felt empty, but free. She had let it all out and was ready to accept any verdict. The judge retired to deliberate. The break dragged on for several hours. Keisha, Cyrus, and Tasha, who had flown in to support her, sat in the empty, echoing courthouse hallway. Keisha couldn't sit still. She paced from corner to corner. The tension reached its limit. "Calm down," Cyrus said. "It'll be fine. After that exposure, they won't wiggle out of it." "I don't even want them locked up," Keisha admitted. "It won't make me feel better. I just want this nightmare to end." Finally, they were called back in. Everyone stood. The judge, with a stone face, began reading the sentence. He spoke for a long time in a monotone, listing statutes and evidence. Keisha listened, but the words didn't register. She was just waiting for the final phrase. And it came. The court sentences Louise Booker to 3 years probation with a suspended sentence. Darnell Booker to 2 years probation. Furthermore, the court orders both defendants jointly to pay restitution and moral damages to Keisha Vance in the amount of $50,000. Probation. Not prison, but not freedom either. 2 years under supervision, checking in with the police, and a huge debt. For people used to living at others' expense, this was a serious punishment. When the judge finished and the bailiffs led away the corrupt notary, who got actual jail time, Louise and Darnell remained on their bench, crushed, destroyed. Keisha walked out of the hall without looking at them. Outside, Tasha and Cyrus were waiting. "Well, victory?" Tasha smiled. Keisha just nodded wearily. "Let's go to my place," Cyrus offered. "Celebrate. I have some good cognac. Bought it with your dad years ago." "No, thank you," Keisha declined. "I want to go home. Just be alone." She said goodbye to them and went to her father's apartment. Walking in, the first thing she did was take off her stiff suit, put on an old cozy robe, sit in her father's armchair, and close her eyes. It was over. The war that had lasted months was finished. She had won. But there was no joy. Only a deep, ringing emptiness. She felt squeezed out like a lemon. All her strength, all her emotions had gone into this fight. She sat in the silence, and images of the past flashed before her inner eye. Here was Darnell awkwardly proposing. Here was Louise welcoming her with pies. Here they were laughing together at some joke. Was it all a lie from the start? Or did they break later, blinded by greed? She would never know the answer, and she didn't want to know anymore. She sat in the chair until evening, not eating, not drinking, just staring into the darkening window. An emotional crash hit her. Not hysteria, not tears, but a quiet, cold numbness, as if her soul, tired of shocks, had gone into hibernation. She knew she had to live on. Process the paperwork, sort things out, decide what to do with the apartment. But she had no strength for it. She just wanted to disappear, dissolve. The phone rang. She didn't want to answer, but it was persistent. It was Tasha. "Keisha, how are you?" "I'm not," she answered honestly. "Empty." "I thought so," Tasha sighed. The adrenaline wore off. Withdrawal set in. "Listen, I'm coming over right now, don't argue." Tasha arrived 30 minutes later with bags of groceries and a bottle of wine. "All right," she commanded from the doorway. "We're going to treat you. The medicine is called friendship therapy." She went into the kitchen and started cooking dinner. Keisha sat at the table and watched silently. Tasha chatted ceaselessly, telling funny stories from work, gossiping about mutual acquaintances. She deliberately didn't talk about the trial or Darnell. She just filled the silence of the apartment with life, sounds, smells. They ate dinner, drank a glass of wine each, and Keisha felt the ice in her soul beginning to melt. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being here." They talked deep into the night. For the first time in a long while, Keisha allowed herself to be weak, allowed herself to cry. She told Tasha about her fears, her pain, her disappointment. And Tasha listened, didn't give advice, didn't comfort, just stayed close. "You know," she said when Keisha calmed down, "the worst is behind you. You stood tall. You won. And the emptiness, it'll pass. New life, new people, new events will fill it. Just give yourself time." That night, Keisha slept peacefully for the first time in months, without nightmares. She woke up in the morning to sunlight and realized Tasha was right. The emptiness began to fill. Not with joy yet, no, but with a quiet, timid feeling of hope. Hope that life goes on and she could still be happy. Her emotional crash became the point she could push off from to start swimming up toward the light. After that night of revelations with Tasha, Keisha felt ready to take the next step, a step from the past into the future. She no longer wanted to sit in her father's apartment, surrounded by ghosts and memories. She needed her own space, her new home. She called Tasha. "Tasha, I want to sell Daddy's apartment." "Are you sure?" her cousin asked. "It's a memory." "Memory is in the heart, not in the walls," Keisha replied. "I need to move on. I want to buy a small but cozy place in a new neighborhood so nothing reminds me of the past. And also, I want to leave Chicago." "Where to?" Tasha gasped. "New York. You've been inviting me for a long time. You said with my brains and experience, I'd find a good job there." Silence hung on the line. "Keisha, that's a huge decision." "I know, and I've made it. Nothing holds me here anymore." A new chapter began. Selling the apartment, searching for a new one, moving. Tasha, being a professional realtor, handled everything. Her father's apartment, with its excellent location and history, went fast and for good money. While the search for housing in New York was ongoing, Keisha stayed with her cousin. She sorted through her father's things, and that was the hardest part. Every book, every photo, every trinket, it was all part of her life. She cried, but she sorted. Some things she kept for herself, some she donated to a museum, some to charity. She knew her father would approve. She found old letters in his papers, letters from her mother, whom she barely remembered. She died when Keisha was 5. She read these letters, and the image of a young, loving woman rose before her. She wrote about her love for her husband, her boundless tenderness for her little daughter. And in one letter, Keisha found a phrase that struck her to the core. "Marcus, baby, I'm so scared. Scared to leave you two alone. Promise me you'll make our Keisha strong. Strong enough to stand up for herself in this world." Keisha closed her eyes. Her father had kept his promise. He raised her strong, the kind who could stand up for herself. 2 months later, Tasha found the perfect option. A small but very bright studio apartment in a quiet, green part of Brooklyn. Keisha flew in for a day to see it and fell in love at first sight. Large windows facing a park, high ceilings, a feeling of air and light. "I'll take it," she said without hesitation. The deal went through quickly, and there she was, the mistress of her own apartment in a new city, in a new life. The move felt like an escape. She boarded the train, taking only a couple of suitcases with necessities and her parents' photos. She watched the familiar landscapes float by out the window and felt not a drop of regret. She was leaving behind not just a city, but her pain, her disappointment, her destroyed life. In New York, Tasha met her. They went to her new, still empty apartment. "Housewarming," her cousin said, handing her a bottle of champagne. "Now you're a New Yorker." They sat on the floor, drinking champagne from plastic cups and making plans. Keisha threw herself into setting up her new nest. She picked out the wallpaper, furniture, curtains herself. She was creating a world for herself, a world where she would be cozy and calm. She started looking for work. It turned out to be harder than she thought. New York is a city of big opportunities, but also big competition. But Keisha didn't give up. She sent out resumes, went to interviews, and a month later, she was hired by a large research library in the rare books department. The job didn't pay huge money, but it was incredibly interesting. She was in her element again, among ancient volumes smelling of dust and history. The pain and shock of betrayal were gradually replaced by a cold, fierce determination. Keisha realized, enough being a victim. Time to fight back. She had allies in Tasha and Cyrus. She wasn't alone anymore. Her fear gave way to anger and a thirst for justice. Her spirit returned. She began developing a counterplan, not a plan for revenge, but for justice. She didn't just want to punish them. She wanted to build her own happy life, proving to them and herself that they couldn't break her. This internal shift marked the beginning of her ascent. Her new life in New York consumed Keisha entirely. Work at the library, fixing up the apartment, walks down unfamiliar streets. It was all new, fresh, exciting. She felt like a student escaping parental supervision for the first time. Except in her case, the parents were ghosts of the past she had finally outrun. She almost stopped thinking about Darnell and his mother. The legal process took its course somewhere back in Chicago. Cyrus kept her updated, but she asked him to report only the essentials. She didn't want to dive back into that filth. But one day, the past reminded her of itself. Her new New York number rang from a blocked ID. She answered, "Keisha?" The voice was quiet, unsure, and she didn't recognize it immediately. "It's Darnell." Keisha froze in the middle of the street. "How did you get my number?" "Found out through mutual friends." He hesitated. "Keisha, we need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," she cut him off. "Yes, we do." Pleading notes appeared in his voice. I realized everything. I was wrong. Mama, she drove me crazy. I want to fix everything." Keisha was silent. "Keisha, I love you," he continued. "I can't live without you. Let's start over. I'll come to New York, get a job. We'll live together." "Darnell," she sighed. "It's too late. Nothing starts over. You can't bring back the past." "But I repent," he almost shouted. "I'm happy for you," she said coldly. "But your repentance changes nothing. Goodbye." She hung up and blocked the number. But this call stirred something in her. She realized that simply running away wasn't enough. They still thought they could get her back, pull her into their orbit again. She needed to put a final, bold period on this. She called Cyrus. "Uncle Cyrus, hello? I changed my mind. I want them to answer to the fullest extent." "What happened, child?" She told him about Darnell's call. "I see," he said. "They won't calm down until they feel real pain." "All right, then we act differently." She didn't know exactly what he planned, but she trusted him completely. A week later, Cyrus called again. Keisha, I have news, and I think you'll like it. Remember I told you Darnell and his mother had a mortgage on their condo? I remember. Well, the bank where they took the mortgage, I have very good contacts there. I passed along some information about the trial, the probation, the fact that Darnell lost his job, and the bank, learning of the newly discovered circumstances and the client's loss of solvency, demanded early repayment of the entire loan. But they don't have money. Exactly. Satisfaction rang in Cyrus's voice. The condo went to auction and was already bought at a very good price. Who bought it? Guess. He chuckled. You. Or rather, I bought it for you. In your name. Consider it a gift from me and your father. Keisha was silent, unable to utter a word. Now you have 2 apartments, he continued. One in New York, one in Chicago. Do what you want with it, sell it, rent it. But your ex-relatives, they are officially homeless. They're being evicted in a week. It wasn't just a counterstrike, it was a masterpiece of strategic planning. Cyrus didn't just punish them, he used their own weapon, greed and stupidity, against them. They were left with nothing, literally. Keisha didn't know what to feel. On one hand, it was cruel. On the other, fair. They wanted to take her home and ended up losing their own. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, he replied. I just fulfilled your father's will. He asked to protect you. I protected you. That evening, Keisha sat by the window in her Brooklyn apartment for a long time. She thought about how she now had another apartment, an apartment where she was once almost happy, an apartment that witnessed her humiliation and her escape. She knew she wouldn't return there, but she didn't want to sell it either. She decided she would rent it out and donate the money to a children's charity. Let some good come from this dirty story. She prepared her final answer. She gathered all the proofs of their guilt, the audio recording, copies of the fake documents, the court ruling, Louise's criminal dossier. She printed it all out and put it in a large envelope. Inside, she also put a copy of the deed to their former apartment, now belonging to her. She sent this envelope by certified mail, not to Darnell or his mother. She sent it to Auntie Gail, the most gossiping and influential relative in their clan, with a short note. Pass this to everyone interested. She knew this would be the final nail in the coffin of their reputation. Now their entire numerous extended family would know the truth in all its ugly details, and they would never wash off this shame. This was her period, her decisive, cold, and ruthless answer. A week after Keisha sent her greeting from the past, Tasha called. Her voice was excited and delighted. Keisha, you are an evil genius. Can you imagine what's happening here? Tell me, Keisha asked calmly, stirring her coffee. Auntie Gail, after getting your package, held a public flogging. She gathered the whole clan at her house, all the aunties, uncles, cousins. She read all your papers out loud. They say the screaming reached the heavens. Tasha paused to catch her breath. Basically, everyone publicly disowned the Bookers. They declared them a disgrace to the family. Louise, who tried to mumble something about slander, was practically chased out with a broom, and Darnell, he just sat there silent. Nobody even pitied him. Auntie Gail said a son like that isn't a man, just to cling on to his mama's skirt. Keisha listened and felt nothing but mild fatigue. And now what? Nothing. They are outcasts. They got evicted. They're living in some rented room on the south side now. No money, no support, no future. Your plan worked 200%. The trap snapped shut. That evening, for the first time in a long time, Keisha felt the story was truly finished. She had done all she could. She defended herself, her father's memory, and her future. She didn't just fight back. She destroyed their world, built on lies and hypocrisy, to the ground, and she did it with their own hands. She sat in her cozy New York apartment, watching the city lights turn on, thinking about how unpredictable life is. A year ago, she was a quiet librarian from Chicago, afraid to contradict her mother-in-law. Now she was a strong, independent woman who managed to stand against a whole system alone and win. Changes happened in her personal life, too. At work, she met a colleague from a neighboring department, an archivist named Julian. Smart, cultured, with a quiet, kind smile and incredibly beautiful eyes. They started talking first about work, then just over coffee at lunch. He was Darnell's complete opposite. He listened to her, not himself. He was interested in her opinion. He admired her mind and strength. It was easy and calm with him. She wasn't looking for a new relationship, but it found her. One day, walking through an autumn park, he took her hand. His palm was warm and strong. "Keisha," he said, "I know you had a tough past, and I won't rush things, but I want you to know, I really like you, and I'm ready to wait as long as it takes." Keisha looked at him, at his honest, open eyes, and smiled. For the first time in a long while, she was truly happy. "I don't think you'll have to wait long," she answered. This was the beginning of her new story. A story with no place for betrayal or lies. A story she was writing herself. Her decisive answer to fate's challenge turned out to be not just the end of an old chapter, but the beginning of a new, much happier one. The trap she set for her enemies cleared the road for her own future, and that future promised to be bright. Years passed. Keisha's life flowed measured and happy. She married Julian. They had a daughter whom they named Marina, after Keisha's mother. They sold both apartments, the New York one and the Chicago one, and bought a big, cozy house in upstate New York with a garden and a porch. Keisha left the library job and opened her own business, a small antique bookstore. It was her longtime dream. Julian supported her in everything. Their house was a full cup, filled with children's laughter, love, the smell of old books, and fresh coffee. The story with Darnell and his mother became a distant, almost erased memory. She knew that the justice she sought so desperately had triumphed in the most complete and cruel form. Louise, after all her relatives turned away from her, was put in a state-run nursing home. Her health was ruined by stress and malice. She turned into a frail, quarrelsome old woman. Darnell, after bouncing between cheap rentals and odd jobs, eventually drank himself to death. He was found dead in some alleyway, overdose of cheap liquor. Keisha found out by accident from Tasha. She felt nothing, no pity, no gloating. That man had died to her much earlier, the day he decided to sell her and her father's memory for 30 pieces of silver. The outcome of their story was harsh but inevitable. They destroyed themselves, their greed, their meanness, their stupidity. It all boomeranged back and ruined their lives. Keisha, on the contrary, built her life on completely different principles: honesty, trust, and love. And her life blossomed. She often remembered her father, remembered his words, his lessons, and was grateful to him not just for the apartment, but for that steel spine he had raised within her. A spine that didn't let her break. One day, sorting through old papers, she found his diary. He had kept it in his final years. She read the entries, tears streaming down her cheeks. He wrote about his illness, his love for her, his fears for her future, and the last entry, made a few days before his death, read, "I know I'm leaving, and I'm not scared for myself. I'm scared for Keisha. She's too kind, too trusting for this world. I see how those vultures, her husband and his mother, are already circling. I left a will. I asked Cyrus to watch over her. But will it be enough? Lord, give her strength. Give her the strength to become a warrior when the time comes." Keisha closed the diary. "I did, Daddy," she whispered. "I became a warrior. Thank you." She realized her triumph was predestined. She was protected not only by friends and the law, she was protected by her father's love, which was stronger than death, stronger than betrayal, stronger than anything in the world. And that love now lived in her children, in her happy new life. Justice triumphed because love always stands on the side of truth, and love is invincible. Years went by, the children grew. Keisha and Julian's house was filled with bustle, joy, and endless motion. Marina started school, and Keisha's son from her first marriage, whom she had shortly after divorcing Darnell, was already finishing university. Keisha looked at her children, at her loving husband, and her heart filled with quiet, deep happiness. She had achieved a lot. Her antique shop turned into a well-known cultural center where lectures, meetings with writers, and literary evenings were held. She became a respected expert. She was invited on TV, interviewed. She was a successful, self-actualized woman, but her main achievement was her family. A family built on love, trust, and respect. Julian turned out to be the man she dreamed of. Reliable, caring, wise. He became a real father to her son, and the boy responded with sincere love and attachment. The story with Darnell and his mother became like an old faded movie she once watched, but barely remembered the plot of. It was the past, distant, alien, having nothing to do with her. One day, organizing old documents, she stumbled upon that folder with the court materials. She was about to throw it away, but something stopped her. She sat in the armchair by the fireplace, opened the folder, and began to reread. Witness testimonies, the court ruling, her own tearful explanations. She read, and before her eyes rose that young, frightened woman she was back then, a woman who had everything taken from her except her dignity, and she felt not pity for her, but immense respect. That woman made it. She stood tall. She won. It was thanks to her, that past Keisha, that she was sitting here now in her warm, cozy house next to people she loved. Her internal victory wasn't about punishing the offenders. It was about walking through hell without losing herself, without becoming bitter, preserving the light and faith in goodness in her soul. She closed the folder. No, she wouldn't throw it away. She would keep it as a reminder of the price of happiness and how important it is to fight for it. In the evening, when the whole family gathered for dinner, her son, already a grown, serious young man, said, "Mom, I gave a presentation at the university today about strength of spirit, and I talked about you." "About me?" Keisha was surprised. "Yeah. About how you, left all alone, managed not just to survive, but to build a new life. About how you never gave up. The professor said it was the best example of resilience he'd ever heard." Keisha looked at her son, at his proud, loving gaze. She looked at her husband, who squeezed her hand tenderly under the table, at her little daughter, who wrinkled her nose funnily, trying to eat a piece of broccoli, and tears welled up in her eyes, tears of happiness and gratitude. Yes, she did everything right. She chose life. And life loved her back. If you believe that a beautiful future can rise from the ashes of any past, no matter how terrible, and that a woman's strength lies in her unbreakable will to live and love, support this story. Write in the comments what helps you not give up in the hardest moments, because every one of your stories is more proof that hope dies last.